You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/ARTS. Just go to Indeed.com/ARTS right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
Welcome to Rings and Things, where we discuss Tolkien adaptations and texts.
We're just two hobbits from the Shire, one bringing the other along on this adventure.
I'm your host, Agnes, and this is my co-host,
Late Night Walker and Letter Learner.
Late Night Walker and Letter Learner, JD. Today we're covering the first part of the Fellowship of the Ring, Chapter 2, Shadow of the Past. So, the chapter opens with basically a big meanwhile in the Shire.
Mm-hmm.
And we get some overview of the description of the next many years.
Correct. Yeah, I got the sense that this beginning narration kind of went on to even past the story. For example, this first point I made, it starts off pretty early saying that Bilbo turns into a campfire legend and his story gets grander and grander. I feel like that could be taking place like past the end of the whole trilogy of books even.
Yeah, and it probably is, because the whole trilogy of books just happens 17 years after that happened. This is probably referring to 17 decades later.
Yeah, I like that. I do like that Bilbo turns into a campfire legend, though. The ending they gave him, just running off and drowning, is very morose, though. I also noticed the hobbits seem suspicious of Gandalf, which I relate to a lot, but specifically for Bilbo's disappearance, which isn't wrong, but it's, unconfirmed speculation.
And while Gandalf was involved in Bilbo's disappearance to some extent, he also wasn't pressuring Bilbo to do it, or even encouraging Bilbo to do it beyond Bilbo's own desire to do it. I mean, he was encouraging his friend to do what he wanted to do, but he wasn't placing these ideas in Bilbo's head.
Yeah, not that we know, and I don't think it much matters. Gandalf, I would say, encouraged it after he heard about it, though. I think
he was encouraging his friend to do what he wanted to do, and he was encouraging Bilbo to do it without the ring. Yeah,
well, even at the end of the last chapter, when Bilbo, once the ring started to influence him, he had to kind of give him a bit of a push.
Yeah, but that was specifically to give up the ring, not to go off and leave the Shire.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I suppose he could have somehow passed everything down to Frodo and not necessarily left.
I mean, he could have just taken the ring with him.
Yeah, that on the other hand, he could have done that too. Everyone is very skeptical that Bilbo is out there alive, though. They all think he's dead, and Frodo responds with, well, I think he is. I think he is alive. And he doesn't really answer any questions, or he's just, quietly believing that Bilbo is alive. Yeah. I quite like that.
I noticed the book doesn't really weigh in about what Frodo's close friends think about it. Like, Sam probably believes that Mr. Bilbo is alive.
Well, I mean, even in the Green Dragon, he seems interested in the more grand explanations anyway.
Yeah.
So it would definitely make sense for him too. But yeah, it doesn't much go into it.
And I also just see Sam thinking that anything that's good enough for Mr. Frodo to believe is good enough for him to believe.
Yeah, definitely. I will say, so Frodo ends up celebrating Bilbo's birthday every year after, and I think if Bilbo is like the author of this, this chapter, this part, like you speculate up until they do the Council of Elrond. I think he really would have touched his heart to hear Frodo tell him that and then get to write it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, though, Frodo is I think he's living at this point quite a nice life. He gets to be independently wealthy, a little bit eccentric, but like he doesn't really have to worry about it because of the first thing his reputation isn't like a business isn't at stake or something. I think his walks alone in the woods by the stars sound quite wonderful.
Yeah, he's kind of got it made. He takes to walking by himself, though. Mm-hmm. So I notice his inclination to isolation here, which on the surface is never a good sign. Mm-hmm. I also noticed that he's talking with strange wayfarers, though. So maybe it's more like solitude rather than isolation.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like it more has to do with, we were talking about earlier, like he believes that Bilbo is alive and everyone else doesn't. It's more isolation out of like a mismatch of values with the people around him, like Hobbit society at large, rather than isolation as its own virtue. Now, it doesn't seem like it's isolation from everyone everywhere, and he just doesn't seem to be a fit with where he's at. Yeah. But also the ring is influencing him, so maybe that's like the first crack, and that's how it gets in.
Another great point. I like that explanation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I didn't think of your point there with Frodo's isolation not being a good sign. I thought of it just kind of accenting how different he was from the other hobbits at large, which is at times a good thing for him.
Yeah, and I'm not particularly alarmed by this on the surface either. Mm-hmm. Like I said, maybe his actions are just more those of solitude rather than isolation.
Yeah.
And the fact that he's talking with strange wayfarers when he does go out walking alone means that, on the one hand, he's alone because he's not with other hobbits that he took with him. Mm-hmm. But he's also not lacking in contact with people. Yeah,
he's not refusing to talk to anyone. It seems like he doesn't have anybody to follow with him yet. It's almost like he's trying to meet the right person in these. Well, you keep calling them strange wayfarers. The book, they say they're usually like dwarves passing through or stuff like that, or hobbits.
He's definitely been seen talking to dwarves. Perhaps he's meeting some elves even.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they mentioned
that's the rumor.
They mentioned elves are passing through the area and have been seen, so possibly. Another thing that you mentioned, this might be the start of isolation, maybe like proto-isolation, we could put it. The ring's definitely having effects on him and not aging, and the other hobbits notice this after a while.
And I do really like that point that perhaps the ring is playing a factor here as well. Mm-hmm. And yeah, there's his not aging. He still looks like a hobbit of strapping young 33 years mm-hmm. old, just coming into his own, as they say.
Yeah, I feel like this, and also just the amount of time that has passed really sets a different tone for me, and is, like we said, absolutely missing from the films. Like, it doesn't feel like decades have passed between Frodo inheriting the ring and Gandalf discovering it's the ring,
Exactly. It's pretty fast in the movies. You can mm-hmm. interpret it, I think, that a lot of time has passed since Frodo hasn't aged a day, since he has the ring. Mm-hmm. I think you could fill in that, there was 17 years there, but there's nothing in the movie to indicate that it's more than maybe a few months.
Yeah, and it's hard because of Frodo's aging. He doesn't feel like he's decades older at all. He definitely doesn't look it, but that's also in the book too, so it's kind of hard to say they should have made Frodo look older in the movies. But they I don't know, maybe they could have made Gandalf look older. But I don't know how practical that would be either, though.
He was already an old man.
Yeah, that's true. So the dwarves passing through mention Mordor. I really like this. They're like rumors. They're low detail. They're like, they make me want to know more. They remind me of like old legends. I think the book does a great job of putting you in Frodo's shoes here. Just the description of what the dwarves have, what information they have. It makes it seem like it's a fictional tale almost, rather than news, which I imagine that's when word of mouth was most common, how most news felt, though.
Yeah, and especially big news of something that's actually happening from thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
Like, Sauron hasn't been around for 3,000 years?
Yeah, so where they're picking up from the dwarves, that is a very old tale that suddenly became very true. So that after the description of, what time passing in the Shire and what Frodo's been up to, they cut to a small scene with Sam discussing this with another hobbit.
Yeah, Sam's in the Green Dragon. And he's with some others, including Ted Sandyman, who's the miller's son.
Yeah, I didn't catch that, but it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. The gaffer is in the ivy bush with they call Sandyman, Mr. Sandyman. And so Ted Sandyman is Mr. Sandyman's son.
And so they're discussing here the passing through strangers, the elves, and the dwarves a bit, but also, like, as we'll see, they talk about walking trees. Sam's interest to, like, the fantastical and supernatural, like, to the Shire, it's supernatural, even if in the world they're not, false. Like, the stuff that people could be skeptical of, and, like, his willingness to learn letters, like, he strikes me as someone who really likes to learn about the world and yearns for a deep understanding, but doesn't really have, resources. Like in other places or other times, he might have been like a scholar.
Yeah, I really liked this interpretation of Sam's curiosity about the world. Sam is meant to be the stand-in for the ordinary person. Like, if we're supposed to really relate to any one character, we're really supposed to relate to Sam. Yeah,
I definitely could see that too.
So, in a letter to Christopher Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien says, quote, "Certainly Sam is the most closely drawn character, the successor to Bilbo of the first book, the genuine hobbit. Frodo is not so interesting because he has to be high-minded and has, as it were, a vocation. The book will probably end up with Sam. Frodo will naturally become too ennobled and rarefied by the achievement of the great quest, and will pass west with all the great figures, but Sam will settle down to the Shire and gardens and inns." And I wanted to bring this quote up just because this is like our first real introduction to Sam directly, where he has such a big speaking role. And like I mentioned earlier, Sam is meant to be like our everyday point of view character. One of the things I think that's interesting in Tolkien's own analysis of this is how he calls Sam the successor to Bilbo. Frodo may have inherited Bilbo's estate, but Sam has inherited the role of storyteller to us. The person that we identify with.
Yeah, and I wonder, some of that is because, I mean, Sam learned, like, his letters from Bilbo and spent a lot of time around Bilbo, but some of it's outside of that, too. Just his character seems to naturally be very similar to Bilbo in the first book, especially.
Yeah, especially Hobbity.
In this conversation, Ted is being, like, he's being sober and realistic. I don't think he's being very explicitly rude, but he's kind of being a wet blanket to Sam's interests and fascination.
Yeah.
He is right, though, that nobody's seen these walking trees or elves or dragons, though, that they know of.
Yeah, he's parochial, though. I mean, like every other hobbit there, he hasn't traveled more than 20 miles in any direction.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like taking a cup out of the ocean and saying there's no such thing as whales.
Something like that, yeah. So, as I mentioned before, Ted Sandyman is the miller's son, and I think that it's perfectly appropriate that Sam is butting heads with him, seeing as though his dad and the miller also butt heads. I also noticed that Ted does seem to have some general popularity, because as he's making these points, he's getting rounds of applause and general approval that if nobody's seen dragons, then they don't exist. That argument meets with approval. He's got some sort of like general popularity in the crowd, despite being the son of a miller who traditionally is disliked in the community.
If I remember correctly, in the first chapter, his dad and Sam's dad have a conversation, right? That's who... Yep. They weren't just talking about him. He was the other participant in that. Ted's a lot, from what I remember, like a lot kinder, or he's not, I wouldn't describe him as kind, but more kind than his father. He just doesn't come off as rude, but he's not quite a miller yet. So maybe once he inherits the mill, he'll finally get that full... I don't even know what the term I could use to describe the demeanor of the miller versus Ted. But there is a difference I noticed, despite even like the audience reactions. I feel like Ted was a lot less of a jerk, it seemed like.
Interesting.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/ARTS. Just go to Indeed.com/ARTS right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
We'll have to see what his character arc has in the end of the story.
I feel like, so Sam... here believing in elves reminded me a lot of Frodo believing that Bilbo is alive, but I get the sense that Frodo's just more quiet about this than Sam.
Yeah, Frodo doesn't really have a reason to bring this into the public eye, I guess. It's just different for Sam. He wants to talk about his belief in elves in a way that Frodo doesn't need to talk about his belief in Bilbo being alive.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like Sam wants other people to take what he's saying seriously, and Frodo doesn't care about it.
And I think Sam wants people to take what Frodo thinks seriously. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's what Sam's really getting at. Yeah,
it could be like a whole veiled conversation, even in a way.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought to me. I've never had that thought before. Mm-hmm. So Sam talks about his cousin seeing an elm tree walking, and it's my personal belief, it's my headcanon, we could call it, that Sam's cousin Hal saw an Entwife. Mm-hmm. So, in the Norse creation story, man and woman are created from two pieces of wood, one of which is from an ash tree, and the other is translated as coming from an elm tree. Mm-hmm. Now, I word it that way because there's an entire translation debate around how to translate this word, whether it should be elm or what else it should be. But elm is how it's commonly translated and how it would have been translated for the text Tolkien was learning from. Mm-hmm. And so I like to make the association between ash and male and elm and female, so that it becomes important that this was specifically an elm tree that Hal saw walking. And I find that suggestive of this entity being female.
Yeah, and that would be just, like, the Hobbit couldn't tell an Ent from an Entwife, and which was which. I mean, they just know them as walking trees.
Exactly. So maybe there are some Entwives walking around in the Shire.
This conversation, it does turn... to Bilbo and Frodo. Ted says that Bilbo was definitely cracked and Frodo is cracking, and you know, he might just be being like rude here and not, you know, just considering them as like eccentric, so weird, but it definitely reminds me of the ring having influence on both of them too.
Yeah, it's important to keep that in mind. I suppose that there is a factor there. So then Gandalf comes back.
Yeah, we cut back to Frodo here. Gandalf is showing up in the night without explanation. It mentions that he does this over the years a few times. I think he is, as he'll phrase it later, his guess is coming stronger and stronger, and I feel like he is coming to deduce or glean more information about Frodo's ring and if it is the ring. They say over a few years he comes, but the last few years he started showing up only in the night.
Yeah. He also doesn't want the Shire talking about his presence there. The less that's known to gossipy hobbits, I suppose, the better.
Yeah, especially they seem... he may have caught wind just how they're talking about him, too. That is a fair point.
Mm-hmm.
They mentioned many times that Gandalf is looking older. I wonder if part of this is the stress of the ring and his guess and stuff like that. As we'll mention more as the conversation goes on, like he has no explicit knowledge that this is the One Ring, but he is stressed about, even if it's not the One Ring, what this ring is, you know?
Yeah, and then all the effort that he goes to research this, because tracking down Gollum and going to the archives of Minas Tirith and all that stuff isn't exactly easy. So he's doing a lot of traveling, and that's going to wear on a person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They so for one of the first sentences they mentioned, Gandalf's looking older, Frodo's looking the same as ever.
Yeah. And Frodo actually tells Gandalf that he looks the same as ever, even when he thinks Gandalf looks older and more careworn.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if maybe this is meant to indicate that Frodo doesn't believe the literal truth of what Gandalf said either, like a polite pleasantry. Well, I'm going to greet you with a polite pleasantry.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise I notice that there's a bit of a gap between what Frodo says and what he actually thinks. One of those shades of truth, shades of a lie.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting that it does make it seem like Frodo isn't... this detail to me, when I first read your note, I was like, well, it's just a pleasantry, it's just being polite. But the second part of this, that this shows that Frodo thinks it's just a pleasantry too, and he's not taking what Gandalf's saying about him looking the same as ever as anything but just a pleasantry. You know, it doesn't occur to him that he's not aging, really.
Yeah, if everyone tells him, oh, how good you look, he's just going to understand them to be being polite to him.
Yeah.
The way I would understand someone who says, oh, you know, you look amazing, you haven't changed at all. I would understand that as, okay, you're being nice to me.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of greetings that are similar to this. But yeah, this one's very common. You hear people who you haven't seen all the time. It's like, oh, you haven't aged a day. Stuff like that, and it is really like people will say it even if it's not true.
Yeah.
So it really is just basically a greeting at that point, just a way to say hello.
Yeah, a custom.
I do think so. They have this exchange of greeting, and then in the next paragraph, Tolkien, or if you want to put it as the in-universe author, whoever it is, takes care to emphasize Gandalf's age again. So they tell us that he doesn't, and then he does like a description of like the wrinkles on his face or stuff like that. I just wonder if this is just another contrast that Frodo still looks very young, or if it's also showing that Gandalf is exerting a lot of effort and preparing to reveal this or confirm this truth about the ring and just the general concern about the effect this ring is having.
I think that it is the effect the ring is having, because Gandalf's been around for a long time, and it is true that his body ages, but it ages very, very slowly, and it seems to have disproportionately sped up over the last 17 years, if Frodo can tell the difference in a being that's been around for 1,000 years or more.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is this to me is very important for the rest of my notes for this episode, and most of them for just for the rest of the chapter. I'll say this is like from the start. I think they're showing that Gandalf is worried about this heavily.
Definitely.
And then Gandalf even delays telling Frodo anything about why he's there. He says it's best left until daylight. Again, this shows the way that this whole conversation is holding on him. He's basically procrastinating it. I mean, there's also something to say about talking about such dark things at nighttime. Like we mentioned with the movie depiction of them leaving the inn. They shouldn't be running out in the night. I think we did that in one of the last language learn letters. So there is something to be said about nighttime actually being increasing of fear and fear having actual real power in this world. But I also think, on the other hand, Gandalf just really doesn't, if you've ever had to have a hard conversation, he's just waiting 6-12 more hours before he has to, you know.
And the 6-12 more hours isn't actually going to change the fate of the world. Waiting till daylight for a better time to not be that extra afraid around the campfire is a good enough reason for him to delay it that much longer.
Yeah, it is true that there is no advantage to telling him sooner, but it does show that he's not exactly eager or anxious to get this out in the open, to me.
No. And in fact, he'll even blow a few smoke rings before they start talking about elven rings.
Yep.
They get into the ring lore dump.
Yes. Yeah. So Gandalf explains basically about the different rings of power in this section, and the power of the ring that Frodo has. He mentions early on that he suspects the regular elven rings are dangerous for mortals, and I don't know, is he talking about the ones that were made before the elven rings of power, or is he the prototype ones, or is he talking about the elven rings of power are dangerous for mortals, or both? Because while you're looking up, I remember us talking about in the Rings of Power that the elven rings, there was some debate on how corrupting they are. And I think this, even if Gandalf's talking about the non-power elven rings that Gil-galad would have made before being commissioned the Ring of Powers, I think this is a good example of showing that the elven rings did have a sort of corrupting influence. This is textual evidence if the show is basing stuff off of the text.
Let me read you the paragraph where he talks about this. In Eregion long ago, many elven rings were made, magic rings as you call them, and they were, of course, of various kinds, some more potent and some less. The lesser rings were only essays in the craft before it was full grown, and to the elven smiths they were but trifles, yet still to my mind dangerous for mortals. But the great rings, the rings of power, they were perilous.
So he is saying that the non-rings of power were even perilous to mortals.
The lesser rings are what Gandalf thinks are dangerous for mortals. But the rings of power weren't only dangerous, they were perilous. It goes beyond dangerous. Dangerous was just level 1, but perilous is level 2.
Got it. And he groups all of the rings of power into perilous then.
Including the elven rings of power would be perilous.
Got it. Yeah, I remember.
And he doesn't even say that they're perilous for mortals. He just says they're perilous, period.
Generally.
He doesn't qualify it as only perilous for humans, or only perilous for mortals, or only perilous for non-elves. They're just straight up perilous. And he wields one of them.
Yeah.
He just acknowledges their peril.
Yeah. Yeah, that's, I mean, it's understandable. It's one thing to say they're dangerous, but, and then, there's the one ring above it, which it goes beyond perilous and is just outright, I don't know what word would be. We don't get a word from Gandalf, but something even beyond perilous, The one ring's worse than the elven rings and the other rings even.
The one ring is utterly evil. The elven rings and the other rings of power are perilous, and lesser rings he deems dangerous.
To mortals.
To mortals, anyway. To the elves, they were just trifles. Yeah.
So the ring, he mentions, and I know that this theme we've touched on many a times, but them making you be unable to die, but stretching you out. I thought it was interesting how he emphasized you're also unable to change at all. I just think that's interesting because a lot of times you would think of destruction and preservation as opposites, but there are a lot of spiritualities that think that creation and destruction are the same force, and preservation's its opposite. Like Hinduism, they have like a big three of their gods, and they have Vishnu, who's the preserver, and then Shiva's the destroyer and also the god of creation, because it's seen as like one force. Neither of these are evil forces; they're just opposite.
Mm-hmm. I feel like in the Legendarium, creation and destruction are definitely not the same force. Mm-hmm. It takes a more fundamentally Catholic approach.
Right.
Preservation is slightly different than creation, though, because the elven rings preserve. That's their function.
Mm-hmm.
And so preservation also seems distinct from creation as well. It's almost like there's three forces, but I would say that preservation does seem closer to creation
mm-hmm.
in the way this is conceptualized in The Lord of the Rings.
In this chapter, in this paragraph, he mentions preservation as a power of the One Ring, and that it stretches you out and extends your lifespan.
Yeah.
So the preservation that the One Ring does, I feel like could be the opposite of both creation and destruction. And I know that, like you said, Tolkien is kind of fundamentally Catholic, and creation is completely different from destruction too.
But you make a good point about the preservation that the One Ring exhibits. It's kind of a perverse kind of preservation. It's corrupted the good part of preservation.
Yeah, I feel like the Elven Rings don't completely even technically preserve. They just very much slow down, where the One Ring preserves to the point where rather than age, it will stretch you out metaphysically.
We'll have to analyze the language around time in Lorien.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/ARTS. Just go to Indeed.com/ARTS right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
When we get there.
Yeah, I'm excited to get more into these ring powers.
Yeah.
And so Frodo asks Gandalf here, he says, how long have you known this, and how long did Bilbo know? These were huge questions for me watching the movie, and none of this dialogue should have been cut whatsoever.
I'm always a fan of more dialogue from the books and the movies.
Yes,
I can get behind this.
This is like the whole Gandalf is suspicious. Everything would have been cleared up by this conversation. Although, I don't know, since I brought that in with me to this conversation, I'm still I have some reserved thoughts on Gandalf's culpability, although he's mostly clear, I feel like, now.
Well, do you feel like he'd outright lie about this?
No, I don't think he'd outright lie.
Okay. But he is definitely speaking in riddles.
Yes, yeah, so he's... I wonder about how much he's being completely honest about what he knew. He says, I never knew, but I had guesses. I think he's really downplaying his suspicions, honestly.
And I think his own belief plays a role in this as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, one of the big reasons that Gandalf doesn't think that this is the One Ring is because Saruman has assured him that the One Ring has been flushed out to the sea by the River Anduin, where Isildur lost it, and it's never coming back. Mm-hmm. Saruman has even practically appealed to the idea that he's been in contact with the Valar about this, so, he knows.
Yeah.
And Gandalf even tells us that the lore of the Elven Rings, great and small, is his province, meaning Saruman's, which seems to indicate to me that part of the job description of the White is ring lore. Mm-hmm. And it would just be silly for Gandalf, whose province is not ring lore, to think that he knows ring lore better than Saruman, who has assured him that it is beyond doubt that this thing is not coming back.
Right. But also Gandalf said that something held him back from mentioning Bilbo's ring to Saruman, which makes me also believe, like, I mean, in the end, it's good. Imagine if he had told Saruman about this ring, and Saruman discovered the One Ring way earlier.
Yeah, something held him back. He didn't want to be humiliated by his professor explaining to him why this basic mistake was something that he was still going on about. Like, imagine if you have a student who wants to tell you that he's discovered the next biggest thing, whether you're in a physics department, a math department, a chemistry department, psychology department. If your student comes to you and says he's solved the millennium problem of your discipline, unless you have a promising graduate student, you're probably not going to believe that the student has done this.
Yeah.
That would be the level of ridiculous, that and more, that we're talking about Gandalf saying, well, maybe I won't tell him my crazy conspiracy theory that I'm entertaining.
Yeah, I don't think that's the only thing that held him back from Saruman. I think part of this is Iluvatar's, like, it's just a inkling or a feeling, and it's good luck that he didn't. Because, again, if Saruman did discover that this was the One Ring before Gandalf had, for example, things could be very different.
And I would definitely be open to a reading that says that the something that held him back was something a little bit more metaphysical there as well. But what it is not is Gandalf is not suspicious of Saruman's loyalties.
Right.
The thing that held him back was not, I think Saruman might be evil.
I got the sense that, even though I know it doesn't make sense because Saruman and him are absolutely on the same side, I got the sense that it wasn't that he necessarily suspected he was evil, but he just felt like it was perilous or dangerous to tell him, for some reason, his theory, outside of just being mocked. So he mentions that Bilbo lies, clearly that there was some sort of unwholesome power. This was his first real warning. I told Bilbo that these rings were better left unused, but he resented it and soon got angry. And then this is also the same time I thought it was interesting. He mentions, what could I do at this point? I couldn't take it from him without doing greater harm. And also I had no right to do so. I could only watch and wait. I might perhaps have consulted Saruman the White, but something always held me back. So he's mentioning that there's some unwholesome power here. And he said he could have consulted with Saruman the White. He didn't need to go and say, I think this is the One Ring, but he could have asked him about it, but something had always held him back.
Yeah.
And I think it was some sort of, not maybe conscious skepticism of him thinking Saruman is evil, but just a mysterious, I don't know why I didn't want to talk to this about him, but
no, that makes sense.
It was something greater at work, that's how I interpreted it reading it.
Yeah. Saruman's name comes from the Old English Searu, meaning device, design, contrivance, art. Dare I say, industrialization?
Yes. Yeah, I think we talked about Saruman's name before too, but I think you just kind of summed up Searu as like wise, maybe, or smart.
Yeah.
But yeah, a more detailed like device or contrivance, that is definitely, the device man is super industrial.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about who wrote what.
So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but the postscript mentioning Bilbo's reputation over a long period of time in the Shire makes it seem like it's not somebody who's in the book writing that part.
Yeah, I agree. It's probably some scribe or hobbit later down the road adding cultural knowledge. So I think that Bilbo wrote the account in the Green Dragon from stories that he will have heard from Sam when they come to Rivendell. I think Sam's going to be telling him all about that conversation with Ted Sandyman.
Definitely.
Do you know what Ted Sandyman told me when I was in the Green Dragon? He told me that there was only one dragon in the Shire, and that dragon was green.
Yeah. Yeah, I bet he talks like that all the time with, or talked all the time like that with Bilbo about dragons and elves and stuff. I'm sure Bilbo played into it a bit too.
I'm sure. Well, I think that does it for our rings. Now let's do our things.
First up, we have Wizard's Wisdom.
My favorite quote from the chapter is from Gandalf. A mortal, Frodo, who keeps one of the great rings, does not die, but he does not grow or obtain more life. He merely continues, until at last every minute is a weariness. And if he often uses the ring to make himself invisible, he fades. He becomes in the end invisible permanently, and walks in the twilight under the eye of the dark power that rules the rings. Yes, sooner or later if he is strong or well-meaning to begin with, but neither strength nor good purpose will last. Sooner or later, the dark power will devour him.
Our quotes actually go kind of well together, because he mentions here in your quote, strong or well-meaning, kind of being resilient. And then this next quote, I think he says earlier in the book, he says, soft as butter they could be, but sometimes tough as old tree roots.
Referring to hobbits.
Referring to hobbits, yeah. The they in that is hobbits. I think these quotes actually, mine's a lot more softer and parochial. And yours is a lot more Gandalf the Grey, with fireworks and thunder in the background. But I think they have a synergy, because he's talking about how the ring eventually will break down anybody, but hobbits are pretty hard to break down.
Yeah, I agree. They really do work together. The reason that I like my quote is if I just conceptualize the One Ring as being power in general, like not a magic ring, just power. Mm-hmm. This is kind of what I think power does to people in the world. Just power in general, sooner or later if he's strong or well-meaning to begin with, but neither strength nor good purpose will last, sooner or later the dark power will devour anyone who is in a position of power. Yeah,
I definitely agree.
Power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So, I like remembering this quote as an explanation of the corrupting influence of any sort of power in the real world.
Yeah. I think if we're talking about like politics, I think by the time most people get to wield any power, they're already been through a system where they're preparing for power so much that they're kind of already a bit corrupted most of the time.
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of many politicians either.
So, in our language, lore, and letters, let's continue letter 131. Tolkien says that always I had the sense of recording what was already there, somewhere, not of inventing, when he describes his writing process.
It's interesting. I know he says always here, but I wonder how much of that, the more like he had stuff laid out, that the consequences just became apparent. Because I have kind of done some writing where it does feel like eventually it's like, well, if this happens, then this must have happened, then this must have happened. It feels like just a chain of events that you're almost just watching or like he said, discovering. But yeah. I feel like it might be something more. I mean, Tolkien had a really strong framework going in, though. So I think it's kind of like with how much work he did beforehand and how much like fertile ground there was to work with, like I could totally see like most of the process was just an unraveling more than a creating.
Yeah, he constructed 2 languages, and that thread built an entire fabric.
Yeah, exactly.
Tolkien points out that The Hobbit was not originally meant to be part of this mythology that he was working on. He was working on this big mythology, but The Hobbit was not actually supposed to be part of it originally. The Hobbit didn't take an elvish point of view. His mythology was taking that elvish point of view. The Hobbit was just something entirely different that he made up for his kids that happened to get popular with other people's kids.
And it did have elves in it, but they were not point of view characters whatsoever.
Not point of view characters, and not even really supposed to be maybe the same kind of elf. He borrowed some stuff from his mythology, but he was almost like adapting his own mythology in a way. Yeah,
I wonder, was he working on this mythology before The Hobbit then?
Yes.
Yeah, I wonder if he just was still working on this one day and decided to include something from his other project as like a Easter egg to himself when he was telling the story to his kids.
Well, names like Gondolin and Elrond definitely existed in his mythology, and he borrowed those names. But was he thinking of the same Gondolin and the same Elrond, or was he just grabbing a name that he liked to recycle into this other world?
Yeah, I think it's more the later, honestly.
Yeah. Again, Tolkien asserts his dislike of allegory, though he admits that, quote, any attempt to explain the purport of myth or fairy tale must use allegorical language, end quote. And he also admits that the better constructed an allegory is, the more nearly it will be acceptable just as a story.
It's kind of funny. The best allegory is just a story.
Yep.
But he does say that eventually, if it's a big enough story, it will have some allegorical concepts in it.
Yeah, you got to use allegorical language to discuss it. But the best allegory is just a story. Tolkien then goes on to identify 3 main themes in his own work. The themes he identifies are fall, mortality, and the machine.
Yeah, these were very abstract, I felt.
Yeah, I had to read these a few times to try to understand what he was going for.
Yeah.
What I got out of it, which may or may not be the entirety of what he was going for, was that the theme of fall occurs in several modes. I can think of explicit falls in the story, like the fall of Melkor or the fall of Numenor, but Tolkien also seems to view a sub-creator becoming too attached to his work as a primary sort of fall. So I can think of some of these in the Legendarium as well, but they're more in the Silmarillion because that's what he's talking about here. He's talking about his greater lore. Yeah,
out of all of the works that I've actually seen and read, you hear a lot about like the historic fall of Numenor, but the ones that I've actually seen, I think Thorin's the strongest theme of fall. He starts off seeming like very noble, but eventually becomes, absolutely despicable.
And that's a great point, because that's a great example of fall, and that wasn't even meant to be part of his mythology.
Yeah. So I do think, and by the time he was writing this letter, the Hobbit was worked into his mythology, but I think the Hobbit still has that theme of fall in it, especially with Thorin. I don't know about the other two in the Hobbit at all, though.
Yeah.
I think by the time we get into Lord of the Rings, the falls already happened, and it's kind of like we don't see many characters who...
Boromir falls.
Boromir's, yeah, probably the best, strongest example, but I think beyond that, most of the characters who are good usually make it through good for the most part.
Gandalf falls.
Oh yeah, he does to the
literally.
Yeah, he falls and then he rises again. But,
different sense of the word fall. Saruman falls.
Yeah, Saruman kind of starts off as like we see the first scene we see him, at least in the movie, is his fall though.
The fall is a plot point.
Right, yeah.
Even if it happened off screen or before, the fall of Saruman is an important note in the course of the story.
Yeah, I feel like Lord of the Rings, a lot of the falls happened probably in the Silmarillion, I would assume, but like Gondor seems like it already has fallen. The Rohirrim have fallen when we encounter them for the first time.
A lot of things are lesser, certainly.
Yeah. I feel like the end of Lord of the Rings, the falls already mostly happened, and it's like just wrapping them up with like one last, like Aragorn comes in and Frodo, and they save the day.
Yeah. The theme of mortality permeates much of art, I think. It's just something that no one can escape. Death.
It's one of my favorite themes in art most of the time too. It's so powerful.
And it's meaningful across ages and cultures.
Yeah, it's the one thing that, well, maybe one thing's a bit, but it's one of the things that all humans have to deal with. One of the few things I'll even say.
Yeah, it's very universal. The story of Numenor has a lot to do with rebelling against mortality. And that's one of the reasons I like that particular story so much, is how it depicts rebelling against mortality. And just the differing natures of elves and men bring the reality of mortality to a prominent place in the story. When you got a race of immortal beings and a race of mortal beings, you're going to be talking about death.
Yeah, I think almost everything that a man or a human does in Lord of the Rings that is evil is out of fear of mortality.
Ooh, I like that idea. I'm going to have to watch for that.
Even, like, I'm thinking the Rohirrim almost turned their back on Gondor because they're afraid to die. Gondor, what's his name? Denethor, his whole thing's the fear of mortality. If we go to Rings of Power, the Númenóreans, like you said, I'm sure the story in the Silmarillion is very similar, is tied to mortality.
Yeah. Rohan being hesitant to aid Gondor is just a movie thing, though. Gotta remember that, because it made no sense.
True. Yeah. Yeah, but it still fits into the theme in that way. But yeah, it I didn't say it was a very perfectly written point, but it still ties into mortality, at least.
It does. The desire for power, which Tolkien defines as, quote, making the will more quickly effective, end quote, will lead to his theme of the machine. Tolkien includes magic in his concept of the machine. He defines that concept as, quote, all use of external plans or devices instead of development of the inherent inner powers or talents, or even the use of these talents with the corrupted motive of dominating, bulldozing the real world, or coercing other wills. Mm-hmm. The machine is our more obvious modern form, though more closely related to magic than is usually recognized, end quote. And I'm sure Tolkien was thinking of industrialization here.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
This entire part of the letter here made me think of Arthur C. Clarke's law. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. The parallel that Tolkien is talking about how our machines are so closely related to our magic. Mm-hmm. Arthur C. Clarke's law wasn't published until 1968, which was over a decade after The Lord of the Rings was published and almost 2 decades after this letter was written.
Wow. Yeah, I've also heard that that phrase as well. I didn't realize that it was 1968, which would have been 20 years after this letter was written.
Yeah, it was 1950. I think this letter was written, so almost 20 years later. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I think that I didn't know the name Arthur C. Clarke, for example, but I think what he's looking at and what Tolkien's talking about are from the same thing that technology really is kind of just magic that we know how to use, basically.
Yeah. And Tolkien admits that he does not use the term magic consistently. While both good and bad magic are both called magic, Tolkien explains that good magic, or elven magic, has art or subcreation as its end. Bad magic has power and domination as its end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think elven magic is maybe a bit of a misnomer too. If I'm thinking about the Rings of Power, started as an elven project, and it's hard to say if they had art or subcreation in mind or power or domination. It had kind of the preservation that it's a middle ground between the two of them.
And maybe that's why they're suspect, because it's on a middle ground.
Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, the magic that elves usually do is very creation oriented, though.
Definitely. Tolkien identifies the evil of power and domination as often coming from a good place. A, quote, desire to benefit the world and others speedily and according to the benefactor's own plans, end quote. And this also made me think of Rings of Power and how Sauron is seeking to heal Middle-earth.
Yeah.
It also makes me think of the question of the Elven Rings. How treacherous are they? How okay are they? Mm-hmm. Because they use magic to preserve places like Rivendell and Lorien from the decays of time according to the wills of their wielders. And I think that casts them in a very questionable light, according to how this letter is approaching these themes.
Yeah, now I'm looking at it, like the preservation is, as you've written, the will of whoever's wielding it. So it kind of is in a way of domination of the wielder's will over the natural force of decay,
Yeah.
So that is kind of a big question mark on these elven rings. Like, how could they be good, really?
Well, Gandalf agrees they're perilous to anyone.
Yeah. Yeah, but he wields one, so he doesn't think they're pure evil, even if they're perilous.
Yep. So there's some gray, blurry lines here.
Interesting. Yeah, I want to know. I'm fascinated with these elven rings. I have been for a while now, but I just can't get enough of learning more about them. But I'm kind of falling on the side of, like, why are all the good guys okay with these? They seem like more or less the same thing that the bad guys want and have.
It's interesting to reflect on. Well, we have a question that needs answering.
The question reads, Hobbits are the youngest or newest of the Middle-earth races. How do their holdings, buildings, kingdom, whatever you call it, compared to the age of other races? For instance, I know that there are plenty of old houses in the Shire that have been passed down through the generations. How would the age of that house compare to, say, a Bree house or City Hall? How far back can we trace historic buildings in the Shire and the rest of the Middle-earth comparatively? From our secret Orcish admirer.
So the Shire was founded in Third Age 1601. That land did not have inhabitants before that, so that's as early as Shire buildings could even possibly go. The Breelanders will tell you that Bree dates back to sometime in the First Age. It's a super old settlement, they'll tell you.
Yeah.
So Bree is like one of the oldest communities that's still around. Mm-hmm. Places like Gondor were only established after the fall of Numenor near the end of the Second Age, comparatively to Bree, but that's older than the Shire.
Yeah.
And the Numenorians built certain things like Orthanc around the same time as Gondor was being founded. So a lot of the ruins you're going to see throughout the story date to that late Second Age or early Third Age period.
So in almost everything's older than the Shire.
Yeah, I'd say almost everything is older than the Shire. As hobbits are the youngest and newest races of Middle-earth, it's kind of what we'd expect.
The communities are older, but I feel like the hobbits are less likely to tear down a building than someone in Gondor to build a new one.
And that's fair. I'm not sure about what, the dates of the peasantry houses might be in Rohan or Gondor. Building into hills is probably pretty stable as well. You're not going to lose your hobbit hole. Yeah maybe a flood, but not to like as much of severe weather. Or fire.
Yeah I don't know. I could see the oldest building in any given settlement being older than the oldest buildings in the Shire, but I could see the Shire's average building maybe being older than some of these other settlements.
Maybe. We know that hobbits like to build their houses instead of holes nowadays, because it's only the richest and poorest hobbits who live in holes now.
Yeah, that's true.
And I don't know how long these wooden houses that they're building would last, because there's always threats of, flood and weather and fire and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think it's funny that they picked Bree as an example for comparing to the Hobbit houses, because you say Bree's, I think, the oldest example you mention here.
Which I think is surprising. I think Bree's the natural comparison that you'd want to make, because Bree's kind of like the Shire, but it's different, and you got humans there with hobbits, but it's still kind of a hobbity community. So I think it's a natural comparison to make, but oddly enough, Bree is claimed to be that old, and I think that's really surprising. I know I was surprised when I read that part of the book. Yeah,
Bree definitely. It seems like, even though these aren't necessarily exactly how the things trend, it feels like it's very small, so it's surprising to hear that it's also old.
Yeah, I can't imagine Bree being super big, but it's at an important crossroads is the thing.
You can follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram through the links in the description. Please follow, like, and subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and other major podcast platforms. To have your question or comment featured on the podcast, please send an email to shirepost.ringsandthings@gmail.com.
If you are enjoying the podcast, please consider contributing to our efforts through the Patreon link in the description.
A hearty hobbity thank you to our first supporter, Lori J. from Florida. We are deeply grateful for your support.
A special thank you to our editor and spiritual producer, Stephen Jeffrey, and thank you for listening.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/ARTS. Just go to Indeed.com/ARTS right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.